The date is the 21st of February 1848. Two young men by the names of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels published what is now known as the Manifest der Kommunistischen Partei, or in English, the Communist Manifesto. It was there in Brussels, Belgium, where history was to be changed forever. This manifesto had little to no success as well as any recognition. The target audience being anyone willing to listen, from the intellectuals of Paris to the working class of Germany. Marx had only seen any real acknowledgement for his work just before his death in 1883. He lived and died a poor man. However, with the help of his lifelong friend and fellow colleague Friedrich Engels, he was able to receive funding for his book to be published. Instead of Marx and his legacy being forgotten to time, in the coming years a group of academics in Russia had established their own stance on how the world should be run, their philosophy stemming from none other than Karl Marx. After searching for a place to freely express their newly found love of communism, in 1903 they decided to settle in the neutral, politically leaning city of Brussels, Belgium, where their predecessor had written the manifesto that had touched their lives so drastically. They called themselves the Bolsheviks, meaning majority in Russian, as a certain group of individuals had the majority of support for their ideas and ideals, in contrast to opposing figures in their circle of colleagues, these being the Mensheviks, or minority in Russian. This is where their work, debate, discourse and brainstorming was done. At this time of the new turn of the century, Tsar Nicholas II of the Russian Empire had virtually full control of the land. Tsar Nicholas was a member of the Romanov dynasty. This dynasty had been ruling over Imperial Russia from the early 1600s and was progressively getting worse, with the tumbling economy, hungry citizens and barely any resources to go around. It was by this point in 1905 that one can claim that a long-brewing sense of anger and frustration had finally seen an outlet. On the 22nd of January 1905, there was a peaceful protest held outside the Tsar's palace in St. Petersburg, led by a Russian priest named Father Pon. The majority of these protesters had been serfs, their purpose to demonstrate against their living conditions, low wages, and poor human rights. It was then, when the crowd had begun to get more agitated, that the palace guards had decided to fire rounds into the crowd, killing around an estimated 100 to even 1,000 people, injuring many more. It was after this that the Tsar had decided to implement a more democratic form of government by introducing a parliamentary system called the Duma to pass legislation by majority vote. However, historically it seemed that it didn't do much and was mainly there for show, to give the Russian people the impression that some progress was being made. Meanwhile, while all this was happening, a certain figure had been studying and meeting with fellow Marxists in Western Europe across Munich, Paris and London. His name was Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, or better known by his alias as Lenin. He had been an active proponent of Marxism and a passionate member of the Bolshevik Party since around circa 1903. News had spread to him of Bloody Sunday and how the Tsar had been reconciling the recent events. It was because of this event in which Lenin and his fellow colleagues at the time had pushed for their ideology of a revolution and Marxist utopia in what was then imperialist Russia. In February of 1917, the people were able to seize power through the abdication of the Tsar, following his atrocious leadership and catastrophic failure of both running the country and conducting themselves through World War I. Soldiers, statesmen, and palace guards who were loyal to the Tsar prior to the revolution found themselves turning their backs on the Russian Empire, either joining the newly popular Bolshevik Party or dividing themselves up into their own anarchist-like organizations. After several attempts of the Duma trying to get the help and attention they needed from the Tsar with continual rejection, they managed to organize their own provisional government for the time being, consisting of the same high-ranking members of the Duma. World War I had still been raging on at this point, driving the country further and further into the ground. This was because of poor quality of resources given by the Tsar's governments prior, including sending soldiers into battle barefoot and a lack of basic equipment in general. This was another big detail of why the people of the Russian Empire had come to take sides against the now fallen monarchy and now in favour of a new change. It was unclear at this point what was to happen to the nation. However, many different organisations and groups of people had their own ideas. Over time, this led to many other events to unfold in the nation as tension grew and things started to collapse more and more. One of these being the Russian Civil War, starting from 1917 and ending in 1922. In between this rather lengthy period, we have multiple significant events such as the March Revolution and the November Revolution, also known as the February and October Revolutions. In March, we have the people showing protest through demonstrations in Petrograd and Moscow over raised prices of basic needs as well as rumoured bread shortages. Strike followed this, thus causing all factories to come to a complete standstill. As replicated before, the crowd had started to get more agitated and the Duma was ordered by the Tsar to deal with it. However, this time the soldiers in the Duma had decided to back down. Most of the soldiers had refused to shoot at the crowd. About 170,000 of them to be exact. Again, another massive milestone for the Bolsheviks and the working classes of Russia. Not only were the people on board, but now the Tsar's very own soldiers and palace guards. At this point in time, the current provisional government, the Duma, had assumed power of the country completely and seized the land, while in the process of making sure to either arrest or execute any known ministers of the Tsar. As for Nicholas, he had decided to make his way back to Petrograd. Little did he know the revolution had by this time spread away out of just Moscow and Petrograd, and had managed to catch up to him faster than anticipated. Rogue soldiers and fellow peasants had stopped his train on his route and forced him to abdicate. On the 15th of March, the Tsar abdicated the throne forever. A few days later, with due course, it was official that the Romanov dynasty had fallen, and a new era of Russia had just begun. So, who was running the country now? The new leader of the provisional government at the time, named Alexander Kerensky, had been doing a decent job on the country as the head of the Duma. Well, technically anything could be deemed decent after the Tsar. The provisional government had now completely taken over the country after the Romanovs. This really had given a sense of hope and relief to the people. They had now passed a few progressive laws such as the death penalty being abolished and press censorship also going along with that. However, Kerensky didn't last too long with his Duma. A certain figure, along with his comrades, had managed to make their comeback, and rather swiftly. Lenin and his Bolsheviks were back. Most of them had been exiled or abroad for years. They had finally managed to assemble in their mass of about 10,000 Marxists. It's also important to note that the Bolsheviks had not taken part in the previous March Revolution. Now fast forward a couple of months into the Bolsheviks' new arrival back in Russia. They had been winning more and more majority votes in councils and elections all over the country. By this point it was clear that the Duma had met their match and were becoming less relevant. Now the Bolsheviks had around 250,000 supporters nationwide by October. Their policies differed from any other political party at the time, including the Duma. They were led by the strong alpha leaders such as Trotsky and Lenin, and they were just very lucky on several occasions of having things go their way. These factors all influenced heavily upon why they had gained such a following at the time and why they were starting to pose such a threat towards the Duma. The Duma retaliated by firing into crowds of protesters demonstrating against Kerensky's government and who were in favor of Lenin. All this tension and disagreement between parties and groups of people had led to what is now known as the Russian Civil War, Lenin leading the Red Army and the White Army being the people of the Duma or the former monarchy, or even just people with more capitalist-like philosophies in general. The Red Army had come out victorious with over 2 million casualties. This is said to be the start of the Soviet Socialist Republics, or USSR, also referred to as the Soviet Union. Lenin was immediately deemed the first leader of the Soviet Union in 1922, the same year the Civil War was won. However, Lenin unfortunately didn't live to see much of his new empire. Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov died on the 21st of January 1924 at the age of 54 of what looked like to have been a severe stroke. Little did he know the power of what the USSR was to hold in the coming decades, for better and unfortunately for a lot worse.